We continue our conversation now with Mike Purzycki, Democratic nominee for mayor of Wilmington. Let's start off with crime. Everybody's talked about tackling the crime problem in Wilmington. No one's really had any success. How are you going to be different?
Well, I've always said that if you deal with crime as a problem, you'll never solve it. If you deal it as a symptom of a problem, you have a good chance to solving that. And I look at our communities where we have more people in prison than people working. In some of our poorest neighborhoods, we have 62% of all men over 18 years old been in the criminal justice system. They come out, they're almost by definition more difficult to employ, but after 2 years they're statistically unemployable. And so when you have a community with this many working age people who are not working, it's hard to imagine what you can do to change things. I mean, because no matter how much you tamp down the crime, the problems that are causing the crime still exist, and they're just going to show up someplace. So in my mind, I've always felt very positive about this, and that is that we want to rebuild communities, and that is we want to rebuild the appearance of those communities. We want to get people working. We want kids to have places to go, so it's parks, community centers that actually function. Middle-class people have certain expectations to go on in their life. Poor people they just can't take advantage of those expectations. Those things, the things that we think are normal aren't normal in the lives of
No, I get it,
and
you talked about this.
And so I think your attitude has to be, you have to rebuild it. Now at the same time, you have to have accountability among your police officers. You know, when we talk to a chief, whoever that chief is, they've got to lay out their plan for public safety, but public safety can't exist in a vacuum. It's got to exist in concert with the other arms of government. So I talk about neighborhood stabilization teams, and the neighborhood stabilization teams are licensed in inspections and police and parks and public works, all the departments that can bring to bear the resources they have to improve communities.
I think sometimes there's an interpretation when people hear a candidate talking about the recidivism rate and that there are too many people that are being incarcerated, that they're going to be lighter on crime. Well,
I'm not a tougher on crime guy. I think I've worked at the Hope Commission for 10 years. We built the Achievement Center where we see people coming out of prison, and we only take the toughest of the tough. And we've seen people's lives change because you treat people with a little respect, and you try to help them in the ways that they need to be helped. And truthfully, kicking a dog harder doesn't make the dog behave better, if you can stand that metaphor. But and so that doesn't mean that you turn every criminal loose who's likely to go out and commit crimes. It means that you use measurements that help you determine and predict who is likely to recommit. And at some point you say, I'm sorry, we've tried, we can't make this work. You're going to have to stay in until you age out, until you stop committing crimes. But there are a lot of young people that we just can't be saying throw the key away with, and that's what we do too often. I say, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I think that the Department of Corrections is misnamed. I mean, the Department of Corrections by itself doesn't correct much. And I think I'd like to see us, as a matter of public policy, change that thinking so that we stop judging and punishing, and we start thinking about rehabilitation, which is what we're supposed to be doing.
The three issues I wanted to talk to you about are inherently intertwined, and that is redevelopment, jobs, businesses, crime, and education. Then they're inherently intertwined because if the city doesn't grow, it's very difficult to deal with any of the other problems.
Right. All the things you mentioned are all part of the solution. The mayor historically has stayed out of a lot of the state level issues. So corrections, I've just told you how I feel about corrections. I think the mayor of the city has got to use his platform to opine on the failures of the state government, or the successes too, by the way. But they've got to be involved in the debate. Education, mayor's got to be involved in the debate. So if all we do is worry about achievement, if that's all we're thinking about, if we obsess about achievement all the time, we ignore some of the real problems in education of our kids in the city. Our kids in the city are the ones who are statistically most vulnerable, and they're the ones who get on the bus an hour early and come home an hour late. They go to places where it's not very accessible for their parents or parent to get to if they need assistance. We make it more difficult for our kids to be educated than we need be, but we've been obsessing about desegregation for 30 years now, and we've never put it in the proper context. I personally believe the city would profit from having a high school where our kids could go to school closer to home and have some sort of a neighborhood identity, a city identity. And I think we would see our kids prospering much more than they do today. Our kids go out to the suburbs and get suspended at an alarming rate. Dickinson High School suspended 44% of its kids 2 years ago. That's shocking. So you get on a bus to go halfway across the county only to get suspended and sent home. Clearly something is not working. Now, there are schools where that's not the case, the busing is not the case, and we still have large number of suspensions. We have to consider that a failure. So if Bayard School suspended 70% of its kids last year, there's something dramatically wrong, and we need to be dealing with that and not just cursing the darkness.
Mike Purzycki, who is the Democratic nominee for mayor of Wilmington. When we come back, there's a very important organization in town that deals directly with trauma survivors. They were there for the family members of the firefighters who just died, and now they need your help when the Delaware Way continues.